Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursaleen. Sayyidina Muhammadin sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Honorable Professor Tansri Zulkifli Abdul Razak, Rector, International Islamic University, Malaysia. Professor Dr. Ahmad Faris bin Ismail, Deputy Rector, Academic and Internationalization, International Islamic University, Malaysia. Professor Dr. Khairudin Aljunied, Professor of Southeast Asian Islamic and Intellectual History, University of Brunei, Darussalam. Professor Dr. Abdulaziz Bargood, Dean, International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization. Deans, Deputy Deans, Professors, colleagues, students, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'm pleased to welcome you all this afternoon to the 8th Istac-World Professorial Lecture on the Renewal of Muslim Thought and Civilization, Perspectives from Southeast Asia, organized by the International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization, International Islamic University, Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur. Indeed, Istac is dedicated to engaging in advanced level study and research about Islamic thought and civilization at national and global levels to nurture comparative, cultural, and civilizational studies devoted to the renewal of Islam and human civilization. Its mission is to produce a new breed of academics and scholars who are multidisciplinary in their expertise, with knowledgeable understanding of the universal message of Islam for the advancement of Islamic thought and civilization, who can address new challenges and concerns facing the Muslim Ummah and humanity, which will enable meaningful living in the 21st century globalized world. Towards achieving its vision and mission, Istac has been organizing series of World Professorial Lecture. And this is the 8th Professorial Lecture, which will be delivered by Professor Dr. Khairudin Aljunied. He is the Professor of Southeast Asian Islamic and Intellectual History, University of Brunei, Darussalam. Before we move on to the next, may I respectfully call upon Professor Dr. Abdulaziz Bargood, Dean of Istac, to deliver his opening remarks. فليتفضل Professor Dr. Abdulaziz Bargood. Can you unmute, Prof. Aziz? Unmute.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Professor Tansri Zulkifli, the Rector of the International Islamic University in Malaysia, Professor Ahmad Faris bin Ismail, Deputy Rector Academic and Internationalization, Professor Thamim Usama, former Dean of Istac, our guest of honor today, Professor Dr. Khairudin Aljunied, Professor of Southeast Asian Islamic and Intellectual History, University of Brunei, Darussalam. Dear professors, doctors, brothers and sisters, our postgraduate researchers, our guests from overseas and from Malaysia here, welcome to our 8th Istac-World Professorial Lecture to be delivered by our Professor Khairudin. It is really a great honor for Istac and the university to have this IWPL, which becomes a platform, university platform to promote the Islamic thought and civilization and to promote the new integrated model of the university not only to Malaysian people here or the region, but to the world. That's why we called it Istac-World Professorial Lecture, in which we invite scholars, dignitaries, civil society, practitioners, leaders, and in fact, in the last one, we invited the former Prime Minister of Japan to deliver this lecture. This means that this platform is not only purely an academic platform for academicians, but also for the leaders in the society, in the ministries, in the economic sectors, and the sectors where which are needed for sustainable development of the Ummah and the world, for that matter. Brothers and sisters, when we started this Iwpl, what we have in mind is to provide ideas and knowledge, not just for ourselves here, but for the world. As our rector always says, first leading and then leading the world. You lead the world through ideas and knowledge, and what you produce of ideas and solutions. Just to recall, the first lecture was by the rector himself on the model of a university the world needs in this context where we live today. And just to summarize the nutshell, we are talking about a new kind of a model of a university where human and humanity and humanizing education and bringing the balanced human, as we call it in IUM now, the Insense Jatra becomes in the center of our focus, as we believe that sustainable development cannot happen if we don't address the human themselves, the people themselves. And when you address people, you need to talk about culture, about civilization, about mind, about heart, about soul, about behavior. That's why we introduce this Iwpl, especially in Istac, as an institute of Islamic thought and civilization, to address these issues of sustainable development and cultural development from this integrated perspective. And then comes all the other 7 series or lectures. If you check, you will find that each one of them is addressing issues related to this focus of how we develop a balanced model of sustainable development in which Islamic thought and civilization can play a great role. This is why today we invited Professor Khairudin, and he will be speaking about a very important topic, which is the renewal of Islamic thought and civilization in order to address the current issues of humanity, but from the perspective of Southeast Asia. So we believe that we need really to show the perspective of Southeast Asia when it comes to the model of civilization, culture, development, and so on and so forth. With this, I really welcome all our participants in the YouTube channel and also in the Zoom here. And I'm very glad that Prof. Richter is with us today, Prof. Faris is with us today, and all these professors and doctors. We have many from overseas, from different countries, and I think this is something great for us to move forward. With this, I thank you, and may God bless you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you, Prof. Dr. Abdulaziz Barghouth, for your opening remarks. And now we move on to the next, who is none other than Professor Dr. Ahmad Faris bin Ismail, Deputy Rector, Academic and Internationalization. May I respectfully welcome you, Prof, to give your welcoming remarks, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Professor Tabim. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Walaikum salam.
Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad. Respected Professor Tan Sri Zulkifli bin Abdul Razak, the Rector of the International Islamic University Malaysia. Respected speaker for today, Professor Dr. Khairudin Aljunied, the Professor of Southeast Asian Islamic and Intellectual History, University of Brunei, Darussalam. My colleagues, Professor Dr. Abdul Aziz Barghut, the Dean of Istac, fellow professors, students, and guests, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters. I guess my job is to welcome all of you to this very important event, the 8th Istac-World Professorial Lecture that will be delivered by Professor Dr. Khairudin Aljunied. So I guess on behalf of the university, I would like to thank Professor Dr. Khairudin Aljunied from the University of Brunei Darussalam for your time and for your agreeing to share your ideas and to also maybe prepare and guide us in this important topic. I would also like to congratulate Istac again for a very successful professorial lecture series. This is number 8 already, so inshallah more to come. And I guess Professor Khairudin, this is, I guess, a part of our university effort on how to bring people together in looking at various important topics, especially the topic that we are going to be discussing this afternoon on the renewal of Muslim thought and civilization, especially the perspective from this region. I guess this is very important because as we know, each region and each culture has our own strengths, our own also weaknesses. So how can we complement each other so that we can work together and move ahead with maybe a new solution and a new model for maybe the next civilization. I believe that now that we are talking about post-pandemic era, I guess based on the reflections of that we have undergone during this pandemic, there are many lessons that we can learn. And and now that we are in the month of Ramadan, the blessed month of Ramadan, and this is how I think the Muslim scholars have the responsibility, the roles that they should come up with maybe a new perspective, a new dimension, as well as a new solutions that can be at least, if not implemented, at least at this stage, that can be discussed and can be offered to the humanity. I guess in this stage, our humanity at large are facing a lot of challenges. Professor Aziz was talking about sustainable development. And of course, we see that there are so many other issues and other problems when we're talking about thought and civilization. So I believe that the Muslim scholars, especially from this part of region, with our new experience, with our new perspective, can provide, if not a better solution, at least I think a workable and practical solution for the humanity. So I really look forward for this lecture to see how can we together, discuss and come up with maybe possible solutions for the humanity. So I think at the end, I would like again to congratulate Istac and the organizing committee for this successful professorial lecture event, and I look forward to benefit from the lecture. Again, Professor Khairudin, thank you very much for your presence and willingness to present your lecture. Thank you very much. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Ahmad Faris bin Ismail, for your opening remarks. Alhamdulillah, you have touched a very important issue. This is what Istac has been doing through several discourses and discussions. And more importantly, the professorial lectures are specifically concentrating on such issues in the light of our new thought that is leading the Ummah and leading the world, leading the humanity. Inshallah, we will try to achieve, with the help of our great scholars and professors from all over the world, our aspirations and goals. With this, we have with us Tansri Professor Zulkifli Abdul Razak, our rector. It is very difficult to get him. Alhamdulillah, with his busy schedule, he is with us. We want to use his presence for a few minutes. May I respectfully request Professor Tansri Zulkifli to say a few words? Please welcome.
I think we have listened to 3 speeches. I will just cut my one very short. Everybody wants to listen to Prof. Khairudin. So once again, I would like to thank Prof. Khairudin for making time for us. And like I say, we look forward to learn from him and hopefully to also expand his ideas so that whatever objective that we want to arrive at, we will do so, inshallah, as smoothly as possible. So thanks once again, and thanks for everybody for giving your time and thoughts for this very important lecture and also the mission ahead. Wabillahi taufiq wa hidayah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullah.
Thank you very much, Tansri, for your kind words. With this, we move on to Professor Dr. Khairudin Aljunied, our guest speaker today. And before I respectfully call upon him to deliver his speech, may I kindly introduce him so that we know his current position. Dr. Khairudin Aljunied, a graduate, a PhD, SOAS, London, is a professor of Southeast Asian Islamic and Intellectual History at the University of Brunei, Darussalam, and senior fellow, previously Malaysia Chair of Islam in Southeast Asia at the Al-Walid Center for Muslim Christian Understanding, Georgetown University. He is the author of a number of books. Among the recent ones are Radicals, Resistance and Protest in Colonial Malaya, published by North Illinois University Press in 2016, Muslim Cosmopolitanism, Southeast Asian Islam in Comparative Perspective, published by Edinburgh University Press, Hamka and Islam, Cosmopolitan Reform in the Malay World, published by Cornell University Press in 2018, Islam in Malaysia, and End-to-End History, published by Oxford University Press in 2019, and Shapers of Islamic Thought in Southeast Asia, published by Oxford University Press recently in 2022. His specialization is on the social and intellectual histories of Islam in Southeast Asia. He is currently writing his new book entitled Sufism in Southeast Asia, a biography. With this brief introduction, may I respectfully call upon Professor Dr. Khairudin Aljunied to deliver his professorial address. Thank you very much. Welcome, Professor Khairudin.
Dearest professors, students, and colleagues, Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. It is indeed a great honor to be invited for this World Professor Series. And indeed, this series of talks are actually meant for people who are very much senior in their field and practitioners who are very much distinguished in their respective professions. So I would like to thank Istac once again for inviting me to share a little bit about my ideas regarding thought and civilization. What I want to do today is basically to share some of my own reflections on the state of thought and civilization in Islam. I will be very, very frank, as Professor Dato' Zulkifli is very much aware about the current state of the Muslim world. For us to, in a sense, get a reality check about what's happening to us right now and in history, in order for us to construct a new way or a new path for a better future, not only for Muslims, but also for the whole of mankind. Let me just turn on the thing. So the title of my lecture today is The Renewal of Muslim Thought and Civilization. As the title suggests, there is an urgent need for us to renew the state of Muslim thought, to move away or to move beyond the current ways of looking at Islam and looking at Muslim societies, and how by thinking or rethinking the ways in which we look at our own societies, we can then create a new civilization for Muslims. The subtitle is Perspectives from Southeast Asia, not only because I and many of those who are attending today are based in Southeast Asia. What I want to do is basically to showcase some of the ideas that have emerged from Southeast Asia that has somehow been neglected by scholars working on Islam and Muslim societies, and to reposition Southeast Asian Islamic thought in the larger landscape or canvas of Muslim thought globally. So I'm going to move in 4 gears. The first is actually, I want to look at the nexus of thought and civilization in Islamic history. Here I will talk about how thought and civilization has always been interacting with one another, and we cannot divorce thought from the making of civilizations, and how in Islamic history, if we look at the ideas of many key thinkers on Islamic history, thought forms the linchpin of the progress of the Islamic civilization. And then I'm going to talk about why we need to renew Muslim thought and civilization. There is a tendency amongst many Muslims who are now thinking that the new wave of Islamic thought is already here. I'm trying to make the reverse argument to say that what has been seen as the new wave of Islamic thought is actually not very new. We need to again reformulate, reposition, and rethink how Islam has been thought about in order for us to construct new ways to looking at our civilization. And I'm going to look at 3 Southeast Asian thinkers and their ideas. These thinkers form a part of a book that will be published very, very soon. Prof. Tamim alluded to it just now. The title is actually Shapers of Islam in Southeast Asia, where I look at 7 key thinkers based in Southeast Asia who have constructed what I call as the Islamic reformist mosaic, a new way of thinking about Islam and civilization that can push our understanding of Muslim societies. And then I will conclude with some reflections on the future of Muslim thought. What do we do next? The kind of positioning that we need to take in order for us to achieve civilizational progress. So let me begin first with the nexus of thought and civilization in Islamic history. We need to understand that in any history of any civilization in the world today, thought has always been central in the making and unmaking of civilizations. Let us step out for a moment from Islamic history to look at world history, that when we look at the progress of civilization in world history, we know about the Greek civilization, which is seen as the first and most established civilization in the world today. Of course, there were other civilizations such as the Chinese, the Persian, the Indian. But when we talk about rational thought, when we talk about philosophical ideas, the Greek civilization forms or were basically at the crux of all ways of thinking. And it has structured the manner to which other civilizations thought about themselves. So we cannot forget that ideas play a central role in the making and unmaking of civilization. And Muhammad Asad, the great Mufassir or translator of the Quran, once made very stinging remark that so long as Muslims continue looking towards Western civilization as the only force that could regenerate their own stagnant society, they destroy, according to him, their self-confidence and indirectly support the Western assertion that Islam is a spent force. If you look at the state of Muslim civilization today, especially if we follow the argument of Professor Said Naqib Al-Attas, who was the founder of Istac, that the university basically formed the peak of all thinking within societies. But if you look at the state of Muslim universities all over the world today, there is still an attempt to mimic and to follow the footsteps of Western universities and Western civilization. I don't want to go very deeply now into this whole world rankings business that is so huge right now. Publications in Scopus and ISI. I myself publish in Scopus and ISI index journals. But this whole movement towards achieving standards that are based on purely Western standards have caused a lot of harm to not only Muslim universities, but also to Muslim societies. And Muhammad Asad, a journalist himself and also a mufassir, as I was mentioning just now, got to the heart of the problem that at the end of the day, then during his time, and now during our time, we are still paying a lot of deference to the West, seeing the West as our standard of measure, seeing the West just because they are profound in the manner to which they express the ideas as the ways in which we should think about our own civilization and the ways in which we are thinking about the world as a whole. It is not already a secret that the ideas of the West has become universalized, and it has become so universalized that many Muslims all over the world today, including Muslim scholars, including Muslim writers and intellectuals, are very much swayed by the ways in which the West think about their own society. So much so that we cannot even ask research questions without thinking through the lenses of the West. And this is a tragedy that has affected us so badly. It has not only affected the Muslim civilization, it has affected all civilizations where the West become a kind of demigod, if I could use the word, that people always use, that scholars always use in order to develop their own ideas. And when we look now closely into the Islamic civilization, it is clear that the problem that we are faced with right now in us trying to pay so much deference to the West has to do with the problem of ideas in society. And here, I want to refer to Malik bin Nabi, a profound Algerian scholar who wrote a book entitled Islam in History and Society. And he mentioned that civilization is the product of a substantial idea, that all civilization, the gem of any civilization, begins with an idea that has always been planted as seeds by which people think about societies, and it grew to become what he says that inspires a pre-civilized society, the vital drive that penetrates in it onto the historical movement. What he basically wrote in French, and this is a translation of French, which can sometimes be problematic. What he is saying here is that ideas inspire the making of civilizations, especially the making of pre-civilized society. And this has become the vital drive of any civilization to move forward and to shape history. It is rooted in an original cultural ambience, that all ideas are actually rooted in its culture, or what we call in Malay, budaya keilmuan. That if a civilization do not have the culture of knowledge, the culture of intellectualism, if a university are very much becoming more and more mechanized and marketized, then good ideas will not be growing from these universities, from this society. So he's saying that it is rooted in a cultural ambience which will decide all its characteristics vis-a-vis other cultures and civilizations. A civilization that is culturally powerful, that has as its basis the culture of knowledge, will in the end influence other civilizations. So Malik bin Nabi is such a profound scholar, very much influenced also by Islamic as well as French thought, but very, very original in his take to civilization. He says that the problem of ideas in the Muslim world emerged, especially with the coming of Western colonization. And he says that not only Western colonization resulted to the colonization of ideas in the Muslim world, the Muslims themselves allow themselves to be colonized. So it is one thing to always hark back to us being colonized, according to Malik bin Nabi. On the other side of the equation, he's saying that Muslims until today, and I would dare say that until today, we are still allowing ourselves to be colonized by others outside our civilization. And because of this, he says, civilization moves in its phases and fluctuations and shows its symptoms and indications. In particular instances, he says, ideas are central and objects are utilized for its purpose. So objects are used in the service of ideas, not the other way around. So again, as I was mentioning just now, right now, because we have been so marketized, we have been so materialized, we are concerned about things. As they say in the Chinese saying, big men think about ideas, middle people think about things, and small people think about other people. And this is actually the crisis of the Muslim society right now, that ideas are not put in the service of objects and things, but rather, according to Malik bin Nabi, objects are utilized for its purpose, or in other cases, ideas are centered on objects. So a civilization that is moving towards its downfall is a civilization that is overly concerned only by materialism, by things, by objects, by markets, by wanting to have digits and numbers and not producing profound ideas of their own. So that's Malik bin Nabi. Moving on from the North African scene, another scholar based in South Asia, later on becoming, he was in India, and then later on he migrated to Pakistan, Sayyid Abul A'la al-Maududi, said when he tried to describe the Islamic civilization that seeking of God's pleasure is the foundation of the Islamic civilization. At the end of the day, the main motivating drive of the Islamic civilization for many, many centuries have always been mardatillah, to gain the pleasure of Allah, and the ultimate goal of a believer's life. This goal, on the other hand, disciplines and strengthens the religious system. When our minds are directed towards pleasing Allah and not pleasing human beings only and things, then, according to Sayyid Abdul Ala al-Maududi, it will save the believers from confusion and direct all of their intentions, beliefs, thoughts, and action towards one center. And that center is to gain the pleasure of God. Why are we academics in the university? To gain the pleasure of God. Why are we writing our books and our articles? To gain the pleasure of God. Once that intention has diverged into another direction, the Islamic civilization loses its way. Islam declares it the highest goal, one that is matchless in its sublimity, that it is so sublime a goal that if one only directs his or her goal towards pleasing God, towards pleasing the higher being, that person will never be in despair. That civilization will never be in a state of chaos and confusion. Now I'm going to quote Sayyid Abdul Ala al-Maududi a little bit longer here, because his description of the Islamic civilization is so pointed and so powerful. He says that Islam or Islamic civilization is not just a religion, and it is wrong to view the Islamic civilization as a civilization of a particular religion. It is a vast system that encompasses man's individual and collective life completely, his thoughts and his opinions, his character and conduct, his private and social life, his culture and politics. Now, such a profound statement was written by someone who never ever in his life stepped into the university. And I always say that sometimes the education that we have gone through is really, according to Noam Chomsky, a miseducation. Universities are not producing the kind of profound intellectuals that you see in Sayyid Abul A'la al-Maududi, precisely because the whole aim of the university now is not to produce the complete human being, but to produce someone who's employable, someone who would fulfill the will and the demands of the market. And he goes on to say, whatever laws have been framed by God for all sections of life, the whole body of these laws is called the way of Islam or Islamic civilization. This civilization is not a national or a racial civilization. And again, he highlights another tragedy of the Muslim world, of the Muslim civilization, that at the end of the day, race and nationality defines us. A Singaporean Muslim is different from a Malaysian Muslim is different from an Indonesian Muslim. And then when we look at our brothers from other parts of the world, especially from Africa, we look down at their civilization, thinking that our civilization are far more advanced than them, that when if you actually travel in Kenya, Kenya is a far more developed place than many parts of the world, precisely because of this nationalist way of thinking about our civilization, that we have become so degenerated, according to Abu Ala al-Maududi. In a true sense, it is a human civilization, a civilization created by human beings for human beings, a civilization that inspired by this whole idea of pleasing God. It addresses man and brings anyone into its circle. And this is the beautiful part of the Islamic civilization. It is open, it is inclusive, it is cosmopolitan. It brings in anyone and everyone. At the peak of the Spanish civilization, we know of stories of Christian intellectuals who travel all the way to Andalusia to learn about the sciences. And they, according to many accounts by Christians themselves, even don the Arab clothing because they see it as a hallmark of an advanced civilization. And he says that at the end of the day, the Islamic civilization brings people to the belief in the oneness of God, Tawheed, his messengers, in his books, and in the day of judgment. Another scholar by the name of Hamka, and again, someone who was educated basically at home, and I think now, as I look into a lot of this literature on people who are profound in their ideas, perhaps homeschooling is actually the best way for us to teach our children, because universities are not really teaching the real substance that we need to give rise to profound intellectuals. Hamka once said that the West was once impressed by the heights by which the Islamic civilization once achieved. Muslim thinkers were open-minded. And this is the first thing, that they read anything and everything they could lay their hands on, and welcome the achievements of the old world, which is the achievements of the Chinese and the Indians. And today, if you look at this whole literature on the rise of Asia, China and India are two mega powers now, controlling basically the economies of the world and the culture of the world. I cannot think of anyone who has not encountered Hollywood and Bollywood before. Every one of us are very much affected by the Indian movie industry, and following which the Greeks and the Romans. Muslims translated philosophy and Greek sciences, discussed and deliberated on them, used these ideas and developed them further. So Muslims were very much basically almost like sponges who take on anything and everything from any civilization that they could find in order to build new civilizations. So that differentiates them from us today, that at the end of the day, for them, it is not only about taking from the West or from other civilizations what was best. Rather, it is about reconceptualizing and moving beyond what they have learned from other civilizations to construct a new civilization of their own. So these are the perspectives of thought and civilization. All of these three thinkers are trying to tell us that ideas create civilizations, civilizations create new ideas. A civilization that does not begin with profound ideas that are born out of deep thought, meditation, contemplation, and thinking will not be a civilization that can influence other civilization. A civilization that is moved primarily by things, by the pursuit of power, by the pursuit of position, by the pursuit of materialism, will not be producing the kind of civilization that would be the avant-garde of other civilizations. So I want to begin with this first gear first, on a high note, saying that we need to look at all of these ideas from overseas before we focus into Southeast Asia. And then we need to then register that ideas were motor forces of the Islamic civilization, and that the spread of Islam into the world, its divinely and humanist aims, were made possible precisely because of the intense sharing of ideas. So I'm so glad to be part of this program, because it is an attempt by Istac to reach out to the larger population out there. and the usage of the word world is so worldly in the sense that it is trying to somehow gain traction beyond the Malaysian context, beyond the Southeast Asian context, to gain, in a sense, acceptance and also to engage with the rest of the world. Intense sharing of ideas and things created by Muslims to the rest of the world and vice versa, and that there existed in the past and even right now civilization circulations. That it is wrong to think that everything came from outside into the Muslim world. Rather, there was a moving back and forth of ideas, of things, and that's why the Islamic civilization flourished, especially in Southeast Asia. Now that's that in the past. That was what we were. I want to now focus right into the heart of our current state and position in the world today. It is always very difficult to be honest of the things that you love most, of the people that you love most. But precisely because of my love for the Muslim civilization and for mankind in general, I am going to be very, very honest about the state of our societies right now. So why do we need to renew our civilization right now? The first is that, as mentioned just now, we are now challenged with different ideologies and ideas that have impacted all the way down to our homes, to our children. 4 ideas that are now influencing us are: first, scientism; second, ahistoricism; third, particularism; fourth, amoralism. So I'm going to move step by step to looking at these ideas. The first is scientism, and many of you here would have already heard of Professor Richard Dawkins, who wrote this iconic book called The God Delusion. As the title suggests, he makes the argument that God is basically the delusion of human beings for many generations, only to discover right now that God actually doesn't exist, or if he does, he doesn't play an important role in human life. He says, as a profound scientist himself, as a scientist, I am hostile to fundamentalist religion, of which he refers to Christianity and Islam and Judaism, the Abrahamic religions, because it actively debauches the scientific enterprise. It teaches us not to change our minds and not to want to know exciting things that are available to be known. It subverts science and saps the intellect. So very forceful, very honest, very frank, and very much putting or pushing the envelope in. Religion, he says, has at one time or another been taught to fill 4 main roles in human life: explanation, exhortation, consolation, and inspiration. Historically, religion aspired to explain our own existence and the nature of the universe in which we find ourselves. In this role, according to him, it is now completely superseded by science. So he makes a strong argument that science could prove more than what religion could. Science can explain, science can exhort, science can console, much like right now we are in the COVID situation, that with science, we are consoled that if we take the vaccine, we should be all right one way or another. And science can also inspire. If science can fulfill all of these 4 roles, then why do we need religion? So the first challenge that we are faced with right now, scientism, the rule of science, where science has become God himself. The second is ahistoricism, where there is a movement now that is telling everyone that the past should actually be forgotten unless it reaches us to a higher level of thinking determined by science. So again, a permutation of scientism is ahistoricism, where the argument is there have been many occasions in the past when remembrance has been an incubator of a determination of a defeated people or group to secure vengeance. So David Rife, what he's trying to say here is that sometimes memories can be very violent. Sometimes memory can evoke certain feelings and reaction, so much so that it gives rise to fundamentalism, to radicalism, no matter how long it takes or what the human cause of doing so will be. So he belongs to this movement who's saying that remembrance can be very, very problematic. And this is affecting our society right now, where people are not concerned with the past as it was. in the past we used to think that history provides us with lessons. Nowadays, people are saying history is a boring subject. There's nothing that we can learn in history. History is narrative. History is just storytelling. And that we should be concerned about the present and the future. The past is mystery, and the past does not provide us any lessons that we can use for the current present, because the current present is so digitized, it's moving so fast a pace that there's nothing in the past that we can learn. So that's the second ideology that we are faced with, and it is impacting our children. I mean, just ask any of your kids whether they want to major in history in university, or in fact in secondary school or A levels. Many of them will say no, 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 because history is about memorization of dates, and it's about looking at sequence and time, and so forth and so forth. Related to that is the issue of particularism. Today, we are looking at basically the rise of what has been called as identity politics. The rise of people thinking that only their way of looking at the world is correct. Only their manner of living life is actually the most legitimate manner. And Todd McGowan, a sociologist, said that today, the prevailing form of politics is that of multiple particular identities, each fighting for their own piece of collective pie. And because everyone asserts that the identity is so unique, is so special, and is so specific, it has given rise what he calls as right-wing populists who are winning elections. So the rise of Trump, for example, the rise of Boris Johnson, for example, who belong to a more right-wing way of looking at politics, is now gaining a lot of traction. And the reason has to do with the fact that societies are becoming more and more particularized in their ways of thinking, and is the result of this fundamental theoretical victory. That particularism is this big thing that is an elephant in the room that we should look at now very clearly, and we should engage, that everyone, including Muslims, are sliding back into their so-called primary identities, and that primary identities have become race, has become nationality, has become locality, has become communal, and this has, in a sense, fragmentized our civilization as a whole. So all of these ideologies are affecting us. If scientism makes us believe, many Muslims believe that God is no longer important, if he has some role, it is basically very minor. Ahistoricism makes us forget about the past and not look at it as really important. Particularism brings us in our ways of thinking to become very, very bigoted in our ways. And the last ideology that we need to be attentive of is what has been called as amoralism, where morality is being thrown out of the bathwater. The amoralist, according to Anita Superson, a philosopher, recognizes that he has a reason to act morally, but denies the force of moral reasons. It's very sophisticated. And what people who are amoralists are trying to say now is that it is not that they are devoid of morals. They have morals. They do believe that there must be some kind of public morality, but there is no reasoning behind it. That this morality is shaped largely by the collective representations of society. What society thinks as moral will be moral. Hence, the throwing away or the putting away of religious morality. And this is another ideology that is becoming more and more predominant today, whether we recognize it or not. Our children, our future generation, and people even in Islamic universities are subscribing to this amoralist idea that yes, I am a Muslim, but no, I need not behave morally. And especially professors, it is affecting professors in the university. Yes, I'm teaching about Islam, but yes, I will cheat if I need to get my stuff published. And I have to be very frank here because this is happening all over the Muslim world. And this amoral position from the perspective of a Muslim is something that we need to be very, very concerned with, to sensitize ourselves in order for us to change the manner to which our universities, our civilization, and our ideas are developed. When we turn into other things, so just now I was talking about the realm of ideas, into the realm of life, we see Muslims not really achieving much in these four areas of life that makes a civilization. from education to public health to sustainable development, which I'm very glad that IIUM is looking into it, but we need to rethink how we look at sustainable development today to cleanliness. If you look at educational achievements of Muslims, according to Pew report, Muslims have the highest levels of schooling where they are a religious minority. So it is better for you to be a Muslim in New Zealand, in United States, in Canada, Lithuania, Slovakia, and Uzbekistan, Kuwait, Kazakhstan, all these countries where Muslims are minorities. It is better for you to be there because you have more schooling than in places where Muslims are majority, like Indonesia. So Muslims in New Zealand get 14 years of school, while Muslims in Iran, in general, get only 5 years of schooling. Muslims in Bangladesh only gets 3.9 years of schooling, and this affects 64.3%, 64.3 million of Bangladeshi. So we're not doing well educationally. We're not getting enough schooling for our children. And when we talk about schooling, it is not only formal schooling, but also homeschooling and so forth. When you look at public health in the midst of our COVID crisis, this study of all Muslim countries concluded that shows that that countries with majority Muslim populations are at a significant disadvantage in terms of health. If you want to get yourself unhealthy, live in a Muslim majority country. The factors that explain these differences include low economic development, low levels of literacy, poor availability of clean water, and the level of corruption. There's not a single Muslim country in the world today that has clean water that you can drink from the tap. Correct me if I'm wrong, but if there's one, I would like to go to that Muslim country. The fact is that if you go to any Western country, you can just take your cup, fill up the water, and you can drink it. But that is not the case in most Muslim countries all over the world, and that affects public health. Again, to focus in on what IIUM is doing right now and what Istac is concerned with, sustainable development. Now, the latest sustainable development report shows that the countries with the highest sustainable developments are mostly Western European and Nordic countries, with Finland being at the top, followed by Sweden, Denmark, Germany, Belgium, Austria. Where are the Muslim countries here? When we call ourselves as the Rahmatan lil Alameen, well, we are down there. When we look at the statistics, majority Muslim countries, Niger is 156, Sudan 157, Nigeria 160, Somalia 162, and then Chad nearly reaching the bottom of the pile, 163. Thank God that we are not at the really bottom edge of the sustainable development goals. But the fact being that Muslim countries are nowhere on top and will never come on top if we do not change the manner to which we address our ideas, our thought, and our civilization. So it is quite clear, merely from this, and I'm very proud of IUM for being concerned with this whole sustainable development issue. But like I said, we need to move beyond it, not only talking about the issue, but engaging it in the wider Muslim world, that we are experiencing a civilizational crisis. The cleanest countries in the world today are, again, Denmark, Luxembourg, Switzerland, United Kingdom, France. Yes, when we look at the statistics of all of these countries, they are the cleanest, they are the most sustainable development is excellent there. People commit suicide, the suicide rates in these Nordic countries are high, but precisely because the suicide rates are high, that we need to infuse some kind of faith, some kind of belief system in that societies. But merely from a civilizational angle, we see that these countries are the most cleanest countries in the world today. If you look at the dirtiest country in the world today, especially when it comes to air pollution, I do not need to talk about water pollution, land pollution, and other types of pollution. Merely by the air, we can actually reduce the mortality of Muslims. Bangladesh, Chad, Pakistan, Tajikistan, Oman, Kyrgyzstan, Bahrain, and Iraq. Only 2 countries are within the list of the most polluted country in the world today. We have a big problem, and we need to acknowledge the problem that we are faced with. Muslims are probably the most regressive and the most civilizationally backward in the world today. So where does all of this lead to? I don't want to be someone who criticizes our civilization, our ideas, our thinking, our universities, our way of doing things, and not offer some way out. And I think, and I believe that the problems that we are now seeing in the Muslim world are actually the problems of humanity as a whole, that the reality is that Muslims form nearly 1/6 or maybe 2/6 of the world population today, and the numbers are growing. We are a youthful civilization, a civilization that is filled, according to Pew report again, with people who are below the age of 40 years old. And we have a lot of young people who are looking forward to a better future for themselves. Hence, it is our duty to provide them the way out. And here, I want to turn to 3 Southeast Asian thinkers. One of them is very much familiar to all of you today and their ideas, and how they, in their thinking about the civilization of Islam and world civilization as a whole, can provide us with some solutions to some problems that we face today. And all of these thinkers, as I mentioned just now, are included in my upcoming book, Shapers of Islam in Southeast Asia. The 3 thinkers are, first, Professor Osman Bakar. Second, Professor Ahmad Ibrahim, who was also in IIUM, a real gem that has been studied by some scholars in Malaysia and other places, but we need to delve deeper into his writings. And the last one, who's not known, sadly, even by Southeast Asians themselves, is Dr. or Professor Zakia Darajat, who was very much active as a psychologist from the 1950s until the 2000s. So I want to begin with Professor Osman Bakar. Now, Professor Osman Bakar is very close to me as well. Has always been very much interested in the questions of civilization and the problems of civilizations. And he has done so through many books that he has written. Right now, Professor Osman Bakar is the Al-Ghazali Chair of Islamic Thought at the International Islamic Institute of Civilization and the Malay World. And he devised this whole notion of the tajdid or renewal in epistemology. I would term it as epistemological renewal. What he means by this is basically a whole reconceptualization of the ideas that we have today, of the disciplines, of the methods to which we approach knowledge as a whole. So Professor Osman Bakar is trying to tell us that at the level of epistemology, which means the theory of knowledge, Muslims have already experienced a kind of crisis. We can see a lot of similarities here between the ideas of Osman Bakar and the ideas of Malik bin Nabi and also Said Naqib Al-Atas and Ismail Faruqi. And he is trying to say that we need to question the limits of the ways in which we think about our respective disciplines. I'm going to go deeper on this, but very quickly, as a matter of telling you about what is going to come out, that there will be a series of essays engaging with the ideas of Osman Bakar. These are 25 chapters written by esteemed scholars in the study of Islamic civilizations and other civilizations. And this will be coming out sometime late this year. And the whole volume engages with the whole question of knowledge, how knowledge is very much influenced by the traditions that it has interacted with, and how the interaction between knowledge and traditions would give rise to a civilization. It exists in a kind of a triangle, and all of the essays try to broach into these questions of knowledge and tradition within Islamic civilization. Now, what is interesting about Prof. Osman Bakar's ideas is this whole idea of a dual consilience. Consilience means to bring together seemingly opposite things. And Prof. Osman Bakar is trying to say that we need now to bring together different sciences in order for us to ask new questions about what is happening in our civilization. And he calls it the synthesis of all sciences through the vision of Tawheed, through the vision of unity as an antidote to the global knowledge crisis. What he is basically saying here, and if he's present here today, he can actually add to what I'm saying. But very quickly, what he's saying is that all disciplines must be seen as in equal footing and importance with one another. They can be classified into different categories, but all disciplines must be subjected to equal scrutiny and put in equal position in order for us to understand the problems of Muslims in the world. The problem that we have right now is that the ulum naqliya, the revealed sciences, have been placed in a higher position than the rational sciences. Because of this, what has happened is that people who are learning the acquired of the rational sciences are seen practically as inferior than the people who are learning the revealed sciences, or the other way around. It is often the case that people who are trained in so-called secular universities are seen as people who are more profound in thinking than people who are trained in Sharia, in fiqh, and so forth and so forth. What Professor Osman is trying to say is that we need to rethink this formulation to bring the natural sciences, the humanities, the social sciences, and the religious sciences together for us to now come out with new ways of thinking about our civilization. Now, it is a hefty and a very lofty call towards a synthesis. It is a vision that to me has not been realized, but from my angle of vision, it is not difficult basically to infuse the religious sciences into our conceptualization of our research. My own work on Muslim cosmopolitanism is very much inspired by the ayat of the Quran, Ya ayuhan nas, inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha, wa ja'alnakum syu'uban wa qabali'an lita'arafu, inna akramakum 'indallahi atqakum. From that ayat, I conceptualized the whole notion of Muslim cosmopolitanism, which can be used to describe Southeast Asian Muslim societies. So it is not wrong, and no one in the academy will fault you for it. In fact, in my case, Edinburgh University Press basically welcomed such an idea to incorporate what is actually from the sacred text, from the Naqliya into the Aqliya, to come up with new ideas. The problem is, to me, not about the consilience, the bringing together. The problem is about asking the proper questions for us to devise new ways of looking at our societies. One issue that we are faced with right now in the Muslim academe, or Muslims in the academe, is that we do not engage in a deep meditation and reflection of not only the Quranic ayahs or the Sunnah or the Hadith of Rasulullah SAW, but also a deep thinking of our respective disciplines. And this consilience, this synthesis would be possible if we engage in that deep thinking. And when we look at the ideas of Osman Bakar, we can see a lot of similarities and parallels with another sociobiologist whose book is very, very much celebrated in the West, Consilience, the Unity of Knowledge, where Edward Wilson is calling for all sciences to be closer and closer together. And Professor Osman Bakar has already articulated in his own way in the History and Philosophy of Islamic Science. I want to put these two books together because they are in dialogue with one another. Edward Wilson did not refer to Osman Bakar, nor did Osman Bakar refer to Edward Wilson. But the fact being that they're either parallel with one another, what differentiates Osman Bakar is that Osman Bakar emphasized on the importance of divinely knowledge in our understanding of human societies. Edward Wilson recognizes divinely knowledge as something that is important, but to him, in this modern life that we are in, the relevance of the divinely knowledge is no longer there. And this is because he subscribes to the scientist or the scientism that I spoke about just now. So what Osman Bakar is trying to tell us is that we need to blend the methods, the theories, the themes, the concerns, and the questions within the Al-Ulum Al-Naqliya, the transmitted sciences, with that of the Al-Ulum Al-Aqliya, the rational sciences, to solve problems of underdevelopment. What does the Quran say about underdevelopment? We need to ask this question. What does the Quran say about educational backwardness? What does the Sunnah say about environmental degradation? What does many of the works of the Muslim scholars in the past say about the corrosion of the human minds? When we can ask these questions from the perspective of texts that are religious, so-called, or that are sacred, with texts that are philosophical or scientific, then we can come up with a new cogent way of looking at our civilization. And this is where Prof. Osman Bakar came up with this whole idea of Islamic science And he argues in his book that the origin and development of the scientific spirit in Islam differs from that in the West. What is the difference? In Islam, this spirit was first demonstrated in the religious sciences. The theory of knowledge of Muslims in the past has always been to begin with the Quran, to begin with the Sunnah, to begin with the Torah, with the heritage of Islamic scholarship. In the modern West, it was conceived in rebellion against religion. In short, the early religious sciences of the Sharia sought to emphasize both the critical exercise of reason, ijtihad, where the rational spirit is celebrated, and empirical investigations. That at the end of the day, it is not enough. And this is basically, to me, some of the crises that I see in Muslim thought, that we tend to be overly conceptual, theoretical, philosophical, without giving empirical basis behind our respective research. We need to merge this together to ask very, very tightly thought of questions in order and engage in this process of ijtihad. Ijtihad, basically the exertion of your rational minds to sleep with your ideas. Inna fi khalqis samawati wal ardi wa ikhtilafil laili wan nahar la ayatin li ulil albab, that in the transition of day and night, this will only be apparent to people who actually use their minds, that we exert our minds as deeply as possible to come up with new ideas in our society. And that will come from the Quran and from the Hadith, if we only give the Hadith a new thought, a new way of thinking. So that's the first. And this is where Prof. Osman Bakar becomes very, very important, not only for Islam in Southeast Asia, but for the world civilization as a whole. This whole idea of bringing together different ways of thinking is something that we are urgently needing right now. The second thinker that I want to talk about, and I'm going to move very quickly so that we have time for questions and answers, is Professor Ahmad Ibrahim, who was Singapore's first Attorney General and former Professor of Laws at the International Islamic University of Malaysia. And Prof. Ahmad Ibrahim came up with this whole notion of what I call as the rehabilitating of the Sharia. Just now, I referred to Prof. Osman Bakar saying that Muslim scholars in the past were very much moved by the ideas that they got from the Sharia to come out with new philosophical ideas. And the same is it with Professor Ahmad Ibrahim. He talks about the harmonization of Islamic and non-Islamic legal and ethical philosophies. Professor Ahmad Ibrahim, and I'm sure some of you are listening in here today, would have met him in person and would have engaged with him, was very much concerned not only with the rule of law, not only with the Islamization of law, not only with the importance of law in society, not only with the urgency of maintaining law and order, but with the predominance and the hegemony of ethics. He, in many of his writings, pay attention to this question of the ethical degradation of Muslims, that ethically we are not behaving as Muslims, as Muslim thinkers, as Muslim academics. I was told when he was in IIUM, he was always concerned about people not coming to work on time and not starting meetings on time, not doing things on time, not putting the most effort in their research, in their teaching, in everything that they do. He himself published more than 20 books of his own, even though he was also a practitioner of law. The kind of commitment that he has towards ethical philosophies is so profound that he says that we need to engage again in ijtihad, and not only in ijtihad, but also in takhayyur, in selection of relevant parts of Sharia and civil law, and piece them together to become what he calls as a coherent whole. He engaged in this notion of a talfiq. Talfiq not only of Muslim thought, but talfiq of Muslim and non-Muslim thought to form a new mosaic. And this goes back to the book that I'm going to be publishing soon, that we need to now look at ideas from the perspective of a mosaic coming together. They may seem to be opposite with one another. They may seem to be contradicting, but when we piece them together and we see the slippages between them, we can now come up with new ways of thinking about laws, about societies, about philosophies. And Professor Ahmad Ibrahim stresses on this. A lot of what he has written about many decades ago, since the 1960s, are now being discussed in the secular academe. A lot of secular scholars working on laws are now saying that we need to think of the future, of a future beyond secular law. How then can we have a society that is managed by a legal frame of reference that includes religious legal traditions? Professor Ahmad Ibrahim had already thought about this. Many of his discussions may seem to be very technical for a lot of people who are reading Ahmad Ibrahim. It is our duty now to read again Ahmad Ibrahim, to look at the philosophical underpinnings of his thought, and how he tried to move beyond the idea of the hegemony of secular law. And he says that we need to address human issues rather than specific Muslim ones. Prof. Ahmad Ibrahim was a very much cosmopolitan figure who says that we need to address universal concerns through a new frame of reference that ensures, first, the protection of minorities. And I hope people listening here today would pay a lot of attention to the study of Muslim minorities, especially all over the world, and to pay attention, according to Professor Ahmad Ibrahim, the issue of women folk, the state of women folk all over the world, whether we like it or not. During his time and in our time, women are still very much treated badly, even in Muslim societies and in any society that we are in. And the disenfranchised, a fusion of the historic ideals of the Maqasid al-Sharia and modern thought. And here, I would like to allude to Professor Jasir Auda, who's doing this in such a profound way. He's trying to look at the Maqasid Sharia from the systems approach, looking at how the Maqasid Sharia address systemic issues in societies, and how this whole idea of engaging at the systemic level could now bridge the ideals of Maqasid Sharia with modern thought. So very, very profound ideas are coming out, and we need to now pay attention to some of these ideas. His own conceptualization of the Sharia is very, very powerful. He says that the Sharia is revealed to comprehend and absorb human life for all times, and was intended to respond to both aspects of human life, the changing and the changeless, the thabit and the mutaghayyiran, in order to meet all of the needs of men. As for the ever-changing aspects of human life, the political, the social, and the economic, the Sharia has provided a permanent structure and a firm frame for each, and has entrusted those who are committed, believing, and learned with fixing the right practice into the right frame. So very, very powerful that we all need to be committed. That at the end of the day, this is not a job. This is a passion. This is a vocation. This is a responsibility for us to think and think and think and write and write and write in order to put the right practice into the right frame. When we ask the right frame of questions, we have the right practice. When we practice things properly, especially in our universities, we will have a right frame of reference for the world. Last but not least, I want to end, before my concluding remarks, with Zakia Darajat, a very unknown figure, sadly, even though she has published many books. She was a professor of psychology at the Sharif Hidayatullah State Islamic University, and she came out with this whole idea of ilmu jiwa agama, or a religious-oriented psychology. She is so important today because of the COVID pandemic crisis that we are in right now. A lot of human beings all over the world are suffering from mental psychosis. It has become more chronic than ever before. And this is why we need to now dig back the ideas of such thinkers, because they reorient us back to the proper psychology that we should be engaging in. And she talks about integrating Muslim psycho-spiritual tradition with modern psychology. She says that the problem with human civilization now is that it is devoid of its own soul. And she says that we need to nurture the soul first. Tarbiyatul qulub, or tarbiyatul ruh, and to discipline the desires, that at the end of the day, people are now following their desire. And especially with this Hari Raya or Eid al-Fitri coming in, a lot of people are now releasing their desires, buying and buying and buying even things that they don't need, and to develop the character innama bu'ithtu liutammima makarimal akhlaq. That at the end of the day, the whole purpose of the mission of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is to purify and to refine the akhlaq through knowledge, patience, forbearance, rational actions, prayer, and meditation in the face of adversity. Right now, when we look into the literature on positive psychology, and we have people right here listening in who are experts in positive psychology, there's a lot of literature now coming out about the importance of meditation. This was not so back in the 90s and beyond, but now religion is coming back into psychological literature, where now a lot of scholars, even from the West, are integrating the psycho-spiritual traditions in Buddhism, in Hinduism, very less so in Islam, into modern psychology. And this is why the writings of Zakia Darajat is so ahead of her time. Right now, this scholar by the name of Harold Koenig has written a book called Religion and Mental Health. He has written a few books on the interaction between religion and mental health. And both scholars are now saying, and Zakia Darajat to me is a precursor of this idea, who's saying that we need to now include religious practices, religious philosophies into looking at mental health, into trying to uncover the reasons behind mental psychosis and mental problems. So this is something that I want to emphasize here, that when we read many of these works read in the vernacular or written in the vernacular, you can find a lot of ideas that are very much ahead of their time. Before Western scholars engage into these questions, a lot of Muslim scholars are already in it, but they were seldom discovered by Muslims themselves. So she says that when religious conviction becomes truly an integral part of someone's personality, such conviction will shepherd every action, speech, and even one's feelings. In the event that one entices a particular person to something that may seem unpleasant and satisfying, that person's inner faith will respond quickly to examine whether it is permissible or prohibited by religion. The person's inner psychology, trained in the Islamic or the religious way, it will prohibit the person from doing something bad. If it is forbidden, no matter how strong the external influence may be, no matter how strong the allure to buy a lot of things during Idul Fitri may be, the person will avoid it because of the fear of doing something that is prohibited by religion. Yeah, so all this problem in the Muslim societies here of membazir, as we say in Malay, which is actually from Arabic, inna mubazirina kana li'khanus shayatin. We are really, if you look at the state of the Muslim world now, we are a society and a civilization of waste. We buy so many things that we don't need, and this goes back to our ruh and our mental predisposition. It has been shown in many studies that people who are usually of lower intellect would engage in the buying of a lot of things, in hoarding things, right? And this is why scholars such as Zakia Darajat wants us to pay attention to our inner being, to be attentive of our soul, our heart, and our mental state, in order for us to not be swayed away or swept away by the forces of modernism and by the forces of materialism. So I would like to conclude, after looking at the three levels of the state of thought and civilization in Islam, to talk about the future of Muslim thought and civilization. As I've been mentioning from the very beginning, a renewal is necessary right now. A renewal is urgent in our society right now, and the renewal must begin with the university, must begin with writers and intellectuals who would engage in problems of society and ask them from questions that are born out of the sacred sources as well as from the secular sciences. We need now more studies on scholars, intellectuals, writers within and outside the Middle East and North African regions. A lot of the literature on Islamic thought has been centered around the Arab world, around North Africa, Egypt, Sudan, and others. These are good writings that we need to celebrate and we need to read, but we need more studies of thinkers in Bosnia, thinkers from Macedonia, thinkers from Kenya, from parts of from the southern and eastern and western parts of Africa, from Russia, because Muslims are also predominant in Russia, and many Muslims in Russia have written a lot of powerful books in the Russian language. And Muslims in India, I mean, they form 400 million of the world population, but very few or very little attention has been given to many Islamic thinkers in India. I have pointed to Sayyid Abdul Allah al-Maududi, who is a prominent scholar. There was also Nadwi and many others called Tanvi and so forth and so forth. And of course, thinkers in Southeast Asia, especially in Malaysia, Indonesia, Singapore, Southern Thailand, Philippines, and others. So we need to have more studies on these scholars and to scrutinize their ideas and to produce cutting-edge writings. And cutting-edge writing does not come out of the blue. It requires a lot of alladhina yadhkuruna Allaha qiyaman wa qu'udan wa ala junubihim. I always tell my students that if you really want to be a profound thinker, you really want to write well, you really want to write a lot, you better think as you are standing, qiyama wa qu'udan, as you are doing the ruku, and wa ala junubihim, as you are sleeping. You better sleep with your ideas. And you think about your ideas as you sleep. And it is through sleep, through dreams sometimes, that ilham might come. The point is that we need people who are committed to produce profound ideas and ideas for practical transformations. It's not only about producing a book. It is not only about writing an article. It is not only about philosophizing about life, theorizing about issues, but it is about writing these things in order for us to create a change, in order for someone to take the book that we are writing and say, this is a gem of an idea that I can implement for myself, and I can use it to come up with new ideas. Ideas must build upon ideas, and ideas that we put out must inspire new ideas, so that these ideas do not become something that we celebrate that no one else can relate to. So that's the first. The second is we need to have more grants and more prestigious positions to be created by Muslim universities and institutes through endowments. So the success of the West, especially of America, in producing top scholars who can write very powerful works has to do with the fact that they have endowments, they have chair positions, prestigious positions. We know that prestige confers prestige, that when you give someone a prestigious position, the person will be inspired, will be more motivated to produce powerful works. And we need more Muslims out there. If you're listening in, and if you are a millionaire or billionaire or whatever that you are, if you're a businessman, we need more and more Muslims from the outside in the industry to provide assistance to universities to come out with these endowments, to come up with special positions that address the topical concerns of these scholars, to address and to research and produce works that address global problems, not only Muslim-specific problems, and also Ummah-specific issues. So we need two levels. Engage with a larger issue of the globe and engage with the issue of the Ummah. IIUM is now very much yet with sustainable development goals. I want to put it to all who are listening in that we need to have a sustainable academic culture. We have now, if I can be honest again, a problem of a start-stop academic culture. Today you start research, tomorrow you have to stop, because the reason is because you have to go and apply for something, some other grant in order for you to survive. Today you are asking a big question that you want to address. Tomorrow you stop asking the question because you need to get your ISI article out. Hence you put your name into another research that has nothing to do with your specialization, and you don't become known for your field of specialization. We need to be sustainable. To be sustainable, we need people from the industry to come into our universities and help us to grow and have this position. And from there, we can have a new wave of renewal in thought and civilization, which I hope would be guided by the ideals of Muslim cosmopolitanism, which means to be open to the ideas from the outside and incorporate it as part of our tradition, and to move away from Tariq Ramadan, who's arguing for radical reform. I said to him personally before that I disagree with this whole idea of radical reform. Islam or the Muslim civilization do not need a radical reform. We have radically been thinking of our traditions again and again, but we need a universal reform. We need a reform that change us universally, not only within our respective countries, but a reform that makes us now more aware of universal questions and try to address it through our experience in our own society. And here, I hope I just want to be a little bit more controversial here. If Prof. Aziz and Prof. Tamin would allow me to, we need to now move away from the Islamization of knowledge to look at the ethicalization of knowledge, which means to approach knowledge from the perspective of ethics. And this is where I would agree with what Tariq Ramadan was trying to do. And of course, the project was derailed for other reasons. But this whole question of ethics, which is akhlaq in Arabic or in Malay as well, is something that we need to talk about a little bit more in our production of knowledge, to be ethical in our production of knowledge, to produce knowledge that address the issues of ethics in society, issues of malpractices, misgovernance, corruption, bribery, and so forth and so forth. And through this, we can come up with a new wave of renewal of thought in civilization. And I hope with the little that I have done in this effort, we will move towards becoming an avant-garde Muslim thought and civilization. As I said just now, it requires a lot of commitment, it requires a lot of dedication, it requires a lot of energy and spirit and will. And if I can use an Arabic word for it, it requires irada, the strength and the whole effort to push and to engage in the ijtihad of all ways of thinking and come up with new ideas to construct a better future for ourselves. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله العظيم لي ولكم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Thank you very much, Professor Khairudin Aljunied, for your presentation. Indeed, it was excellent, it was remarkable, it was thought-provoking, and it has generated many questions from the participants. We have 80 participants in Zoom and 50 in YouTube. In addition, we have also our Honorable Rector with us. We have also Professor Hafiz from Kuantan joining our Zoom today, Professor Ahmed Faz.
Assalamu alaikum. I think maybe Prof. Tamim is having like a technical. Okay, let me take over so that we save time. Do you hear me? Okay, thank you, Prof. Khairudin, for this excellent lecture. And let's go straight to the maybe before Prof. Tamim comes back to the questions we have here. Many questions sent directly to us or in the chat, and also some brothers raised their hand to give direct questions. Maybe I ask Prof. Richter if he has any comment or view on these thoughts before maybe we open up, inshallah.
Thank you for this privilege, Prof. Aziz. I would just like to thank Prof. Khairudin for that thought-provoking. Many of your ideas really resonates with what we are trying to do, and I hope this lecture today will sort of push us towards motivating us, making this real. I just want to bring to your attention, I think the world will be meeting in Barcelona in May to talk about the futures of education. And one of the sessions is about decolonizing open science. And this, I think, not just a Muslim problem, it is a world problem that we are now being, quote unquote, placed into a different sort of framework, what we call, most of us call, what they call scientism, not only scientism, but a kind of a delusion in itself. So I hope this is a starting point for us to have a bigger discussion, hopefully moving into something that is for beneficial to all of us. So thanks so much, Prof. Khairudin. We would like to see you in person sometime. Whenever it is ready, we are able to engage you in person, inshallah. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Unmute Prof. Tamim. Prof. Tamim. Unmute, Prof. We cannot hear you. Okay, I think Prof. Tamim, one more time.
Okay,
okay, go ahead. Yes.
Okay. Oh, sorry, it was instantly disconnected. Maybe something wrong with the internet connectivity in my locality. I'm sorry, Prof. Tansri has made his remarks just now. We have Professor Hafiz joining us, and we have people from many countries. I really take this opportunity to welcome them to this important occasion. And we have several questions. Before we start our questions from YouTube, can we have some questions directly from the participants? And one participant who is willing to ask this question is Dr. Arya from the United States. May I invite Dr. Arya to ask the question first, and then we move on to other questions, please?
Yep.
Dr. Arya, you are with us?
Arya, you have to unmute, I think.
Okay.
Yes.
Well,
Welcome,
Assalamu alaikum.
Welcome,
I hope everyone can hear me. First of all, thank you for that excellent talk. I learned a lot about it. I did have one question for you. One of the many topics that you addressed in your presentation was that of identity politics. And on the one hand, recognizing that the Islamic tradition puts a lot of value on cosmopolitanism and common humanities, but on the other hand, there is this issue of identity politics in different groups across the world being concerned with working together as groups to preserve their distinctive form of life. Many people will argue that much Islamic thought is geared towards a type of identity politics and that there's a place for that. So I was wondering if you might comment on this broader question. When, in terms of your remarks on identity politics, are you talking about extreme identity politics, or do you believe there's a place for some measure of identity politics in a Muslim society and in terms of Muslim governance? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for the excellent question. Well, in the first place, there is no concept in Islam of an identity politics, but Islam acknowledges the existence of certain unique identities that given cultures can actually express. And that's why we go back to that ayat again, Inna khalaqnakum min dhakarin wa untha وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا, that we have divided you into men and women, and also between nations and tribes. So the Quran acknowledges that people would be defining themselves in terms of their own respective identities. But that identities must not be politicized to an extent that it results to a very extreme form of what Ibn Khaldun conceptualized as asabiya. Now, Ibn Khaldun is very interesting here because he makes the argument that asabiya, the whole idea of a group feeling, which now we call identity politics, could bring about a very cogent group that can then fight in unity against all enemies. And he says that that brought about the creation of the Northern African empires. What he does not say in his analysis is that precisely because of the asabiya, that led to the downfall of the Muslims themselves. That because there were so many asabiyas, identity politics, if you want to use the word, a lot of the Muslim empires in the past were very fractious and were divided along all of these so-called racial and national or communal lines. So my concern is with, as you said just now, with these extremisms that have developed, not only within the Muslim societies, but in any society right now all over the world. Many scholars, even Francis Fukuyama has just written a book on identity. Anthony Appiah has also written another book making almost the same point, that precisely because of the problems that we see in postmodernity, that people are now seeing that being fuzzy, being someone of multiple identities, will not help you or me to gain the very interest that we want to pursue. Hence, the development of all these right-wing politics in the West, for example. So to go back to the Islamic spirit of identities is that all identities must have certain essences, but that essence must not be fixed, but it has to be fluid. That any identity has to be an identity that is open-ended, that is willing to incorporate the goodness that come from any other identities around it, to avoid Muslims from falling into this question of an extreme identity politics. I hope that answers it.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Khairudin. Let me just read some questions which are with me. Thank you, Prof. Khairudin, for your informative lecture. In your view, do you think our universities and institutions of learning are disseminating the required thought and culture for civilization forming in our changing context?
Right. So referring more specifically to Muslim universities,
yes.
Well, I think it depends on where we are talking about. I would like to direct everyone to the books that have been written and edited by Masuda Banu, a Pakistani British scholar, and she has studied a lot of the seminaries, even female seminaries all over the world, and also looked at the question of Muslim universities as well. Have they actually achieved their ends? Yes, to some extent. A lot of these institutions have helped Muslim societies a lot. I mean, look at IIUM as a case in point. At certain time in its history, and many of the people here would vouch for this, IIUM produced some of the best graduates in Malaysia, in fact, in Southeast Asia. We have so many people in Singapore, in Brunei, in Philippines, and others who are produced by IIUM. A lot of these Muslim universities have given rise to the rise of new thinkers for a new generation. But I would like to say that we have not done enough. And precisely because we have not done enough, that the places by which these Muslim universities are based are the very places where we see suffering from civilizational crisis. So let's look at Egypt as a case in point. Anyone who has been to Egypt before would know how Egypt looked like, especially Cairo. And this is where we need to ask the fundamental question, what are these Muslim universities for, right? Are they places to only produce Muslim scholars who address Muslim issues? Or are they supposed to be universities that produce ideas and scholars that would engage in immediate questions and concerns of their societies and therewith change them and also then address global questions? I'm saying this because my own daughter is currently in Jordan, studying in a so-called Muslim-dominated university. But I always believe that Muslim universities can produce people who engage with larger issues of humanity rather than Muslim-specific ones. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Khairudin. I have another question with me. Is feminism a form of particularism? Does this particularism have a parallel with fascism, which emerged after the chaotic situation of World War I?
Okay, wow, feminism cannot be equated with fascism. These are two different things. When we talk about feminism, we have to talk about, there are many variants of feminism to talk about. There is a militant form of feminism that have this whole idea of an extreme equality in all things in life between men and women. So if man wants to open his shirt in public, women can do also the same. There's also the more moderate kind of feminism that talks about issues of concern amongst women, of which it addresses problems of marital rape, domestic abuse, the inequality that women are suffering right now in the workplace. This is the type of feminism that is, to me, in line with our spirit in Islam. I always believe that Islam is a feminist religion of a feminist faith. What I mean by this is not that Islam endorsed the ideology of feminism in totality, but that Islam has always been concerned with the issues of women. And that's why I talk about Ahmad Ibrahim and his engagement with the issue of women. He was the one who devised the Women's Charter in Singapore. And precisely because he was inspired by the Quran, if you look at the Quran as a whole, there are few surahs in the Quran that address women-specific issues. You have Surah Maryam, you have Surah An-Nisa, you have Surah Al-Mujadalah, and the list goes on and on. So it is not wrong to take some ideas, to me, from feminism, but we need to be clear of what kind of feminism that we are talking about. For the large part, a lot of the issues that the feminists are concerned with and have been concerned with are the issues that Muslim thinkers in the past, in history, have addressed and have been concerned with, but they do not use the word feminism because the whole idea of an insan is someone who is men and women and who interact with another to solve each other's issues and problems.
Okay. Thank you, Prof. Khairudin, for your answer. I think we have two of our colleagues raising their hands. May I invite Prof. Muhammad Aslam to raise your question? And then we come to Prof. Imtiaz Yusuf. Prof. Aslam.
To be allowed to unmute.
Yeah, we can hear you, Prof.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum
Salam, Prof.
Firstly, thank you very much, Prof. Khairudin, for your presentation. Let me just say that, I think your entire first part of your description of the ills in the Muslim world, I think we all agree. In fact, they would be very much in line with what was stated by Professor Latas in his Muslim dilemma and maybe Al-Faruqi in his malaise of the Ummah. And I agree fully with this idea of sustainable academic culture. Just a couple of points. Firstly, your quote by Muhammad Asad saying that we should not be overly looking to the West. I'm sure you mean that it doesn't imply excluding interaction, right? I mean, there is certainly a need for Muslims to interact. And the reason I raise it is because we do have among some Muslim scholars who are saying that we don't need, to follow the last 200 years of what has happened in modern scholarship. We go back, to our sources. So, I mean, just maybe a little bit of explanation on that. The second point is about the idea of moving away from Islamization to ethicalization. I have no problem with whatever IOK needs to stand for. It started off as Islamization, and I think now the I has become integration. And of course, Tariq Ramadan has talked about his views about Islamization. Personally, I think this is a very contextual issue. In the Muslim world, I don't think Islamization is a problem. It may be a problem maybe in other parts of the world, especially in the last 20 years. And therefore, the use of this term Islamization, if correctly understood, and I go back to the views of Alatas and Faruqi, who talked about the need for interaction, but from a solid base of our own foundations. So I would argue that it's this misunderstanding, but politically correct, if we want to change the term, I have no problem. My only worry is, just like you quoted Prof. Almarhum Ahmad Ibrahim, and I was very fortunate to be, with him, although in a different faculty, but to learn a lot from him about his personal traits. The term harmonization that he talked about, and which our Kuliah of Laws does, it poses a challenge. On what basis are you harmonizing? So my point that I want to raise to you is, if we change it to integration of knowledge, or if we change it to ethicalization of knowledge, what's the basis of that process? Because the basis is going to determine what we want to do, as opposed to everybody else who's also talking about reform. Wallahu a'lam.
Okay, thank you, Prof, for that question. Maybe I'll start with the second one first, because this Islamization of knowledge thing is is a little bit touchy, but it ought to be addressed. Now, let me first explain to the audience very quickly, because you can read the book of Prof. Mumtaz Ali, and also even Professor Aslam and Professor Tamim has also written about this. Professor Abdul Aziz also have engaged on this issue. The first is the whole idea of what is knowledge, right? What is knowledge? Knowledge is first genealogical. It has to be, there must be a genealogy of knowledge, right? Knowledge must come either from a divine source, or we get our ideas from another idea first, right? That means from that perspective, all knowledge are linked to one another in one way or another, right? Second, knowledge is relational, and you talk about it. It has a relationship with another idea of its time. So if the first means that it has to engage with something before it, the second means it has to engage with something that is contemporaneous with it. So knowledge is genealogical and relational. And third is that knowledge is transformational. Knowledge must give birth to new knowledge, or else it's just a chatter in the coffee shop, right? Hence, from these three perspectives, genealogical, relational, and transformational, all ideas are products of its time, to be engaged, to be rethought, to be reformulated, and to be moved forward. If in the past, the first creator of a plane come up with this whole idea that if you have a big enough wing and a strong enough thrust, you can just fly something up in the air with two people sitting on it. The scholars of the future that looked at these basic principles say that that theory is actually right to some extent, but incomplete. Hence, we have jet planes, fighter jets, and so forth and so forth. The same is it to me with the Islamization of knowledge. The Islamization of knowledge is a movement that came about in its own way and in its unique way, and I've read most of the works on it, in its own profound way, to address the questions of an epistemological crisis of Muslims. It is a third world reaction to the problems of knowledge from the 1960s onwards until the 1990s. It has served its function to make us aware of the importance of looking back at Islam and digging back into our tradition at a time when secularism was at its peak. But we are in a situation right now where all of these problems that we faced in the 1960s have taken on new forms, and that interactions between civilizations have become so close together that we need to move beyond this whole question of only Islamizing that knowledge. Because at the end of the day, we need to ask ourselves, who are our audience? Are we in the process of converting Muslims to be more Islamic? Or wama arsalnaka illa rahmatan lil alamin? That at the end of the day, Allah says very clearly in the Quran that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was brought down to mankind as a mercy for the whole of mankind. Hence, the way in which we conceptualize knowledge must be for the whole of mankind. And this is why I have a problem now, at least, with the issue of Islamization, because it does not address the larger issues that mankind is faced with. Now, turn the equation around, right? Let's move out of the Islamization of knowledge and philosophically now look at other knowledges that we are exposed to. We are exposed to theories of science, right? Where science tells us that only with the use of vaccines that we can fight this problem of COVID infection in our bodies. On what basis does that knowledge rely on? Does it rely on an Islamized science? No. It relies on the idea of science that is based on the whole notion that it is trying to protect human lives, which is in line with the Maqasid Sharia anyway, and it tries to address it through experiments and through the creation of new antidotes for the problems that we are in. How did that person who are going from the perspective of normal science come to the same conclusion as us who are Muslims without referring to the scripture? The reason is because they are also observing humankind in the ways in which we do, with exception of acknowledging the existence of God. And this is why I said just now that Professor Osman Bakar's idea is something that we need to develop further to move beyond this Islamization project. We need to now look at the synthesis of all knowledge forms. Call it what you want, right? But certainly it is not only about Islamization, right? It is about bringing knowledge to another level, so much so that even non-Muslims can relate to it. Now, take note that the whole idea of the divine in knowledge, of having divine wisdom in knowledge, is not a Muslim province. Even Christianity and in Buddhism and Hinduism, they are talking about this. But have we ever heard the Christians saying, we need to Christianize knowledge? Have you ever heard the Buddhists saying, we need to Buddhize knowledge or Hinduize knowledge? They don't. But you have profound Christian scholars writing about science, about mathematics, about economics, about Islam. Hans Kung is a Christian theologian writing about Islam. We must take heed of the kind of approaches that they have without imitating them. And we need to now open up our minds a little bit more and question whatever that we have been used to be thinking about. So this is my challenge to everybody who are listening here, who are already in the Islamization of Knowledge project. Can we move beyond Islamization of Knowledge project? My answer is yes. Why we can move out of the Islamization of Knowledge project? Because knowledge has become so universalized now, more interaction, more relational and transformational. Hence, we go back to the genealogy of knowledge, to go back to some of the traditional works that we can refer to, but at the same time, take in other traditions to come up with a new tradition of our own. One last point on this point is that when we look at the works of the most profound scholars of Islam in history, there was not a single one of them who ever used the word Islamization. Not a single one. It was called Al-Muqaddimah, the introduction. Ash-Shifa, the cure. Al-Fasl, it is Al-Muhalla, Ibn Hazm. And Al-Farabi, Al-Madina, Al-Fadila. Why didn't he say Al-Madina, Al-Islamiyah? He didn't. And the reason is because their way of thinking about civilization was so wide and so embracing and so inclusive that they did not need to go back to referring to Islam in order to show that something is Islamic. So that's my response to that.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Khairudin. Of course, this issue needs to be discussed further, whether we maintain Islamization or we travel to ethicalization. I remember a year ago when we had a seminar in Istac, Professor Anis Ahmed was also using the term ethicalization of knowledge, and he was somewhat advising us to consider ethicalization instead of Islamization of knowledge. Of course, we need to have a special seminar on that, inshallah. With this, we move on to Professor Imtiaz Yusuf. I saw your hand. Would you like to ask anything?
Yeah, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Professor Khairudin, Jazakumullah Khair, always a pleasure to listen to you and get inspired from you. I have 3 points to make. I think as Muslims, we need to distinguish between the two historical phases, the pre-Mongol and the post-Mongol era. The pre-Mongol era is the scientific era which you mentioned about, and it is the height of Islamic civilization. And the post-Mongol invasion era, even though they became Muslims, we have this warrior-oriented understanding of Islam, which Max Weber very, very much talks about. And we are stuck into that. You go to the masjid and you go to any occasion, and it's always about even portraying Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam as a warrior, war. And we have to overcome this epistemological problem at the same time. Second point is, I very well understand your comment on materialism coming from Brunei and the state of materialism over there, which I have seen very much. Well, my third point is issue about qada wal qadar. We need to re-understand the question of predestination and free will in Islam. I was listening to Talal Asad, and Talal Asad said predestination means what has already been the past. In your life, in my life, what has been in the past. And Qadar is the future, and it should be based on the concept of freedom and free will. Unless and until we don't understand and reinterpret the concept of Qadar, that we have the freedom, we have the free will, not only at the personal level, but at the intellectual level, scholarly level, to come up with the new ideas. I think we cannot get over the debate of our stuckness, which you are mentioning, stagnation, which you are talking about. He calls it decadence. And I think, so there has been, as Professor Tamim says, a lot of debate on Islamization of knowledge and, a lot of semiotics on the term, but that is not that important. But I think we need to look more about the concept of freedom of thought within Islamic thought. Thank you very much.
Right, thank you, Prof. Yeah, and also the whole issue of Qadar and Qadar is something that Hamka talks about very much in detail, that at the end of the day, what has been forgotten by Muslims is that they have the freedom to decide on what is best for their own cause. Man ihtada fa innama yahtadi li nafsi wa man dhalla fa innama yadillu 'alayha wa la taziru waziratu wizra ukhra wa ma kunna mu'adzibina hatta nab'atha rasula. Allah says very clear in the Quran in Surah Al-Isra that whoever goes right, he goes right for his own self, and whoever goes wrong, he goes wrong for his own self, and no one will be responsible for anybody else's actions. That at the end of the day, you choose your path, and He gives you the choice. There is this way, bil yamin and bishimal. If you take the right way, you will go right, and if you go the wrong way, you will go wrong. Now the problem is that in many of our societies, we think that everything has already been predestined. Hence, we become lame and we become docile. And this has been the problem. And I think somebody made a comment in the chat about taqlid. Taqlid basically happened because Muslims have a wrong conception of qadar and qadar, that they think that everything has been decided upon. Hence, follow whoever that you think is the wisest in your neighborhood or in your country or in your village, and that's it. And that led to the stagnation. Now, going back to that historical point that you make about 2058, the Mongol invasion of Baghdad that led to the downfall of the Muslims. Yeah, there is a book by Mona Hassan who looks at this. It's a very good book on the longing for the caliphate. It's a very good book to read because she's arguing against that very point. She says that there were two caliphates that fell in the history of Islam. The first is in 1258. The second is in 1924 with or 1922, whichever date we want to use, with the fall of the Ottoman Caliphate or the Ottoman Empire. In both cases, it was seen as a big tragedy for Muslims. Now, did it affect other things in Muslim life, in Muslim civilization? Depending on which angle of vision you are looking at. And I had this argument with a friend of mine who wrote this book on underdevelopment in the Muslim world. Prof, I think we were talking about the book as well before, that when we center our analysis only in the Arab world, in the MENA region, yes, that decline was very much happening, that the scientific spirit of Islam was stifled after the fall of the first caliphate and then the second caliphate as well. But if we look at our angle of vision to look at India, for example, the scientific spirit was very much alive and in a renaissance from the 13th or 14th century onwards. If you look at Southeast Asia, in the sultanates of Malacca, of Aceh, of Patani, these are great sultanates who had powerful science and technologies and weapons. I don't know whether people know that the Malaccan Sultanate used to be on par in terms of their weaponry. And again, Prof was talking about war just now, but it's actually more for defense during the height of its empire. The point being that it is not correct to say that with the fall of the Islamic Empire in 1258, that the Islamic scientific spirit or the scientific spirit in Islam was very much in the doldrums. That is not correct. There was still a lot of thinking over philosophy, over science, over new inventions. But what happened, and there has been books now written on this, I forgot the title right now, on the 17th century reform, I will gather it later on, that it was only in the 18th century when many of the Muslim regimes became tyrannical towards its own people, and the ulama being in cahoots with the umara in stifling Muslim minds, that, as Malik bin Nabi said, Muslims became colonizable. He used the word colonizability. It's a bit mouthful. They became easily colonized. So that decline came a little bit much later. I just want to clarify one point here. There's also been an argument saying that it was Ghazali who was the one who stifled Muslim minds with his book Tahafut al-Falasifa. This is also a wrong argument. There's no such thing as one person turning the course of history. This whole theory of great men in history doesn't apply, only applies to Thomas Carlyle, this British scholar, but it was a massive movement at both systemic, individual, governmental, and other levels that resulted to this stifling of the Islamic spirit. Now, if very quickly I can address another issue that Professor Aslam was saying just now about the interactions with the West. Anyone who claims that we do not need anything from the West should not have a handphone, right? Should not have a Mac, should not have any technology, should not take a Boeing, should not get on an Airbus, right? The reality, as I was saying just now, of knowledge today is that it is the West who are producing some of the things that we need now. And lo and behold, Muslims are in the West. Just look at the list of people in NASA. Many of them are Bangladeshis and Indians, right? And they are Muslims, Fatur Rahman, Habibullah, and so forth and so forth. So when we say that there is this distinction between knowledge of the West and knowledge of the East, knowledge of Islam and knowledge of non-Muslims, the reality is that Muslims are everywhere. Muslims are in great universities in the West. Muslims are producing knowledge in the West and transporting it back to the Muslim world. Knowledge now is, we are witnessing a confluence and a cosmopolitan interaction between Muslims everywhere in the world. This West and East division no longer exists. It exists only if we think that the West is more superior than us, right? Okay.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Khairudin. It is now 4:32. I do not know whether we can continue. We have several questions from YouTube as well as from chat, and some of them have written in Zoom. And we are unable to really respond to all these questions because of the time factor. So one last question from the YouTube is, in the talfiq of thought of Muslim and non-Muslim knowledge, how and where do we as Muslims draw the line that cannot be crossed?
Draw the line that cannot be crossed. The line is ethics, as simple as that, right? It is our ethics that should be the moral compass to determine what can be done and what cannot be done, right? And if anything that transgresses the basic ethical concerns that we have as Muslims, we ought not to do it. So, like, for example, doing research on animals. I was talking to a scientist who was doing research on animals, and he said to me that he decided to stop research in a given lab because they were very cruel towards the animals that they use for research. They basically poke them and just kill them right on, right? There are no ways of dealing with these animals in a manner that is ethical, that takes care of animal welfare. And the same is it with research that would give rise to weapons that would cause mass destruction, or with research that can cause environmental harm. All of this would be avoided if only human beings go back to the basic ethical concerns that we all share. Nobody would disagree that we shouldn't destroy the environment, except big companies who want to make money out of their industries. Nobody would disagree that there must be safety and security of anybody and everybody in public. And nobody would disagree that women ought to be protected in all sense of the word in societies. Everybody agree on these basic points. And this agreement comes not only because we are Muslims, this agreement comes because we are human beings who are guided by divine concerns. And Islam, I would like to say here, because we were talking about Islamization of knowledge, provides to me the most supreme ethical ideas that any civilization had ever conceptualized. But Muslims have not been studying it enough. And this is our problem. The non-Muslims are studying us in much more in-depth way than ourselves. We have been ignoring our ethics, and that's why the way in which we produce our own knowledge has been unethical. I would like to end there.
Okay. Thank you very much, Prof. Khairudin, for your answer to this particular question. Of course, there are many questions. As I said, we are unable to entertain all these questions because of the time factor. And I take this opportunity to thank Professor Dr. Khairudin for his eminent thought and presentation. I also thank Tan Sri Zulkifli Abdul Razak, our Honorable Rector, for his presence. I also thank Professor Ahmad Faris Ismail, our Deputy Rector, who gave his welcoming remarks. Of course, Professor Hafiz has joined. He's also our Deputy Rector for Research and Responsible Research and Innovation. And many professors have joined from different countries and different universities. On behalf of Istac, I really would like to thank all of them for their presence and their participations. And inshallah, we will forward these questions to Professor Khairudin. He may be able to address this in some of his writings through his network, inshallah. With this, may I respectfully call upon Professor Dr. Abdulaziz Barghouth to give his concluding note.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. Tamim. I think you have done the job well. You have already concluded, but what I wanted
you to conclude, actually.
What I wanted to mention here, I think this is one of the very good lectures and sessions we have under this Iwpl. It actually, it's like a trigger to go deeper, to go into an intellectual exercise, so that we see things in different context, in different situations. And I think Prof. Khairudin has put us in a context where we need to talk more about dynamism and efficiency and efficacy of Islamic thought, and the ability to solve issues and problems, rather than the abstraction and maybe the theoretical things, but how to transform and translate all these epistemological and all these frameworks into dynamic and efficient solutions and alternatives. I think there where people can see the dynamism of Islamic thought and civilization. I think we have seen today a very good perspective of what this region can also provide as another way or another model of looking at renewal of Islamic thought and the civilization. I think there are many other scholars that can be presented, and their ideas can be deliberated. I think we have a task now to promote and disseminate the thoughts of scholars in this region. We have learned a lot from the Arab world, from Middle East, from India, from Pakistan, from these regions. I think Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Indonesia, and the region here, I think there's a very big room to really show the thought and the way, the approaches of this part of the world, how they look at civilization, at tamaddun, at Islamic thought and civilization in action. I think we have learned a lot from Prof. Khairudin. I would like to thank everyone, especially our Prof. Richter, our top management, the deans, the directors, the professors, the doctors, who are the students, the researchers. Alhamdulillah, it was really great, and there are a lot of things to do after we hear such kind of deep thoughts, inshallah. Our journey will continue with, inshallah, activating and renovating and renewing the Islamic thought and civilization. With this, I thank you all. May God bless you. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much, Prof. Abdulaziz. Can we now have the presentation of appreciation certificate to Professor Dr. Khairudin Aljunied? Prof. Yes.
Thank you very much.
You will receive the real one, maybe in Brunei or in Malaysia here when you visit us.
Thank
Inshallah.
you, inshallah, inshallah.
Okay, thank you. It is nice, nice. Okay, with this, now we have come to the end of our session. May I kindly invite Assistant Professor Dr. Nick Muhammad Saiful Azizi Nick Abdullah, Deputy Dean, Student Development and Community Engagement of Istac to recite dua. Falyatafaddal.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, Prof. Tamin, Prof. Abdul Aziz, Dean of Istac, Honorable Rector, and Deputy Directors. Thank you, our great speakers today, Prof. Khairudin, and brothers and sisters. Inshallah, let us pray to Allah to make our program and our life more blessed, peaceful, and sejahtera, inshallah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin. Sayyidina wa maulana Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Allahumma la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. Allahumma ja'al jam'ana hadha jam'an marhuma wa tafarruqana min ba'dihi tafarruqan ma'suma wa la taj'al fina shaqiyan wa la mahruma wa adkhilna bi rahmatika fi ibadika as-salihin. Allahumma fa'na bima 'allamtana wa 'allimna ma yanfa'una wa zidna ilma. Oh Allah, make useful for us what you taught us and teach us knowledge that will be useful to us. Oh Allah, increase us in knowledge. Allahumma inna nas'aluka khairal mas'alah wa khairal du'a wa khairal najah wa khairal amal wa khairal thawab wa khairal hayah wa khairal mamat. ثبتنا وثقل موازيننا وحقق إيماننا وارفع درجاتنا ونسألك الدرجات العلى من الجنة يا رب العالمين. Oh Allah, we beg you to make our requests as the best of our supplications. We beg you for the best success, for the best duty, and for the best rewards. Allahumma inna nas'aluka ilman nafi'a wa rizqan tayyiba wa amalan mutaqabbala. Oh Allah, we beg you to make our skills heavy with rewards. Make us patient in our actions, passionate in our works, dedicated in our jobs, knowledgeable in our fields. Make us humble in our behavior, strong in our faith, compassionate to our subjects, and tolerance to our differences. Allahumma arina al-haqqa haqqan warzuqna ittiba'ah wa arina al-batila batilan warzuqna ijtinabah. Allahumma ahsin 'aqibatana fil umuri kulliha wa ajilna من خزي الدنيا وعذاب الآخرة. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Okay, thank you all very much. We have come to the end of our session. May Allah bless us. May Allah bless the Ummah. May Allah bless the humanity. Inshallah, we meet next time for the 9th professorial lecture, which will be next month, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Wa billahi tawfiq wal hidayah.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Prof. Thank you, Translator.